What happens when a simple act of kindness changes not just one life, but many? When a moment of humanity in a crowded grocery store becomes a turning point for everyone involved. This is the story of an elderly man, a cashier, and a stranger in line who held more power than anyone could have imagined. It's a tale of struggle, compassion, and the unexpected ways life can surprise us. The elderly man's name was Walter. He was 78 years old, with silver hair that always seemed a little messy, no matter how much he tried to comb it. His hands were rough from years of hard work, and his eyes carried the weight of a lifetime of stories. Walter lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years ago, and since then, life had been a series of quiet days and long nights. He missed her terribly, but he tried to keep going, one day at a time. Walter didn't have much. His pension barely covered his rent and utilities, and by the end of the month, he often found himself counting pennies just to buy groceries. But he never complained. He was a proud man, the kind who believed in doing things for himself, even when it was hard. That's why, on this particular afternoon, he was standing in line at the local grocery store, holding a basket with just a few items: a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a small bag of rice, and a single apple. It wasn't much, but it was all he could afford. The cashier's name was Clara. She was in her early 20s, with a warm smile and a kind heart. Clara had been working at the store for about a year, and she loved her job. She enjoyed talking to the customers, especially the older ones who came in regularly. She had noticed Walter before. He always came in around the same time, always bought the same few items, and always paid with exact change. There was something about him that made her want to help, though she wasn't sure how. Today, as Walter placed his items on the conveyor belt, Clara noticed something different. His hands were shaking slightly, and there was a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. It was a mix of sadness and worry, as if he was carrying a burden too heavy to bear. She scanned his items one by one, her smile never fading. "That'll be $12.47, she said gently. Walter nodded and reached into his pocket for his wallet. He opened it slowly, his fingers fumbling with the worn leather. Inside, there were a few crumpled bills and some loose change. He counted it out carefully, his hands trembling even more now. But when he finished, he realized he was short. He was missing 47 cents. Clara saw the look on his face. It was a look she had seen before, but it never got any easier to witness. It was the look of someone who had done everything they could, only to fall just a little short. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her own pocket. "Don't worry about it," she said softly, pulling out 2 quarters and placing them on the counter. "I've got it." Walter looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something deeper. It was the kind of look that said, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for caring." But before he could say anything, a voice behind him interrupted. "That's very kind of you," the voice said. Both Walter and Clara turned to see a woman standing behind them. She was in her late 40s, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had a friendly smile. But there was something about her that seemed different, something that made Clara pause. The woman stepped forward and placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Let me take care of that," she said, pulling out a $20 bill and handing it to Clara. "And add whatever else he needs." Walter shook his head. No, I can't accept that," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't have to do that." The woman smiled. "I want to," she said firmly. "Please let me help." Clara looked at Walter, then at the woman, and finally back at Walter. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the pride that wanted to refuse, and the need that wanted to accept. After a long moment, he nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you both." Clara quickly added a few more items to Walter's bag, some fresh vegetables, a box of tea, and a small package of cookies. She handed him the bag, her heart swelling with emotion. "Take care, Walter," she said. "Come back anytime, okay?" Walter nodded again, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He turned to the woman and extended his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You've done more for me than you know." The woman shook his hand firmly. "It's my pleasure," she said. "Sometimes we all need a little help. There's no shame in that." As Walter walked out of the store, the woman turned to Clara. "You're a good person," she said. "Not everyone would do what you did." Clara blushed. "It was nothing," she said. I couldn't let him leave without his groceries." The woman nodded. "Kindness like that is rare," she said, "and it should be rewarded." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Clara. "Give me a call tomorrow. I think we should talk." Clara looked down at the card, and her eyes widened. The woman's name was Elizabeth Carter, and the title underneath her name read, CEO of Carter Enterprises. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of Carter Enterprises. It was one of the largest companies in the state, known for its philanthropy and community work. She looked up at Elizabeth, her mind racing. I don't know what to say, Clara stammered. Elizabeth smiled. Say you'll call, she said. I think you'd be a great fit for our team. Clara nodded, still in shock. I will, she said. Thank you. As Elizabeth walked out of the store, Clara stood there for a moment, holding the business card in her hand. She couldn't believe what had just happened. A simple act of kindness had led to this. She felt a surge of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things were going to get better. Meanwhile, Walter walked home with his groceries, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. He thought about Clara and Elizabeth, about their kindness and generosity. He thought about how, even in the darkest times, there were still good people in the world. People who cared. People who made a difference. That night, as he sat in his small apartment, eating a warm meal made from the groceries he had been given, Walter felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not just for the food, but for the people who had shown him that he wasn't alone, that there was still kindness in the world, and that, no matter how hard life got, there was always hope. The next day, Clara called Elizabeth. They met for coffee, and Elizabeth offered her a job at Carter Enterprises, a position that would allow her to continue helping others, but on a much larger scale. Clara accepted, her heart full of excitement and gratitude. As for Walter, he became a regular at the store, but now he had a little more to spend. And every time he saw Clara, he would smile and say, "Thank you," because he knew that, without her kindness, his life might have taken a very different turn. The moral of the story? Kindness is never wasted. It has the power to change lives, to bring hope, and to remind us that we're all in this together. So the next time you see someone in need, don't hesitate to lend a hand. You never know how much of a difference you might make. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Stories like these remind us of the power of kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or inspired you in any way, let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to share this story with others. Sometimes, a simple act of sharing can make a huge impact. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our community. We've got more heartfelt stories coming your way. Until next time, remember, kindness changes lives. See you soon.